Hey, folks, welcome again to the Profitable Sheep and Goat Production Podcast. It's Leon here again, along with Matt. And today we're happy to have Dan Macon on with us from Auburn, California. So, Dan is a sheep farmer and he also works for the University of California. He's in cooperative extension. So, welcome on here today, Dan. We're happy to have you here.
We're really happy to be here. Thank you guys for the invitation. It's always fun to talk about sheep with folks in different parts of the country, and I'm looking forward to learning from you guys today.
Yeah. So, as you folks know, folks can either email or call in, leave a voicemail with questions for the podcast. And we've been getting the question twice now on livestock guardian dog tips on starting pups. And Dan has been involved in some research, I believe, with livestock guardian dogs. And so we decided to see if he'd come on and just talk with us some about livestock guardian dogs. So, Dan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you've done. Let's see where this goes.
That sounds good. Sounds good. So, just a little more background on cooperative extension, and I'm sure most folks have worked with their local extension agent in one way or another. But California, many of us get to cover multiple counties, and I've been the advisor here in four counties, kind of in the Sierra foothills in northern Sacramento Valley to orient you. My counties go from the valley floor at about 20 feet above sea level, up over the Sierra Crest at well over 10,000 foot elevation and into the Great Basin. So I cover everything from kind of suburban targeted grazing operations on up to public lands outfits that are all open range, no fences, running on the Forest Service land in the summertime. My own sheep operation has primarily been based in the Sierra foothills, and so we've run a lot on leased ground or on targeted grazing projects where we're getting paid to manage weeds or reduce fire danger, and so have had lots of hands-on experience as well as kind of professional and research experience with the sheep throughout the region. We started our sheep business, gosh, almost 20 years ago, um, here in Auburn, and early on figured out that lots of stuff like to eat sheep in our environment. We've got kind of the typical predators you think of. We're always worried about neighbors' dogs, like it sounds you guys are as well. But we've got coyotes and black bears and mountain lions and bobcats and now even have gray wolves back in the region, reintroduced into the region. And this being California, we have some interesting challenges in terms of what we are legally allowed to do in terms of our predator protection systems. Mountain lions, for example, are specially protected. You have to get a special permit if you have a lion killing sheep or killing cattle, and it's increasingly hard to get that permit. Same with black bears. And then wolves are listed as an endangered species by the state of California. There's no lethal take allowed at all of wolves. And so I think, you know, looking at the variety of tools that are out there to protect our sheep from predators as a producer really took me down the path of working with livestock guardian dogs. And when I became the advisor here for cooperative extension, there was kind of this natural opportunity to do some research-based work with guard dogs, with my own dogs, and with other producers, really to understand kind of best practices, how they work, why they don't work in some cases, and try to figure out some ways to help people make them a more effective tool.
What breeds of sheep are you running out there?
So we are a little bit unusual for our part of the world. We're in a little higher rainfall area than most of the sheep producing areas in California. And so we can't run fine wool. A lot of the Western sheep are Rambouillet or Rambouillet cross, and we simply can't run something that fine. Our sheep are, we run mules. So we run a cross primarily between a North Country Cheviot and a Blue-faced Leicester to get our ewe flock. And then we breed those mules to Shropshire bucks as a terminal cross. a little bit more moderate frame size for our country, which is good for our market. Um, and in our system, because of the higher rainfall, we like a white-faced, black-footed sheep, just in terms of foot rot resistance, and these particular breeds have been really effective for us. There are a lot of Dorpers and Katahdins out in this country too. A lot of the targeted grazing outfits are running hair sheep with really good results. But we've stayed kind of in the wool side of things. And our market has evolved over the years. We mostly sell feeder lambs now at weaning, finish a few lambs, but in the past we've done some direct marketing of meat and some specialty markets, ethnic markets with our lambs as well.
Yeah, sounds like we could do a whole episode with you just on sheep, man.
You get me talking about sheep, I might never shut up. I don't know.
I was just gonna say, Leon, I'll let you get back to your guard dogs here, but the sheep thing really intrigues me. Just seeing how producers do it in different parts of the country is really intriguing to me always. So
me too. Me too. I think probably you guys are the same way. Every time I go on vacation, I try to go see somebody else's sheep operation, just because it's so fascinating to see how everybody does it a little bit different.
Yeah. We're going this weekend. We're going away while I'm traveling east to be there at Matt's production sale, and Friday night we're gonna make a few stops, and then I told my wife that, hey, this guy over here, he bought a ram for me the other year, and we've learned to know each other pretty good. Let's just stop in there and see those guys. Anyway,
that's both of my daughters when they were in high school really were not a big fan of all the sheep vacations, but they both ended up working around sheep and cows, and so you never know where that's going to end up.
My wife always wonders if we can't go on a trip without, having sheep thrown somewhere in there, because it's always kind of like you were saying, Leon. It's like, hey, I know this guy out here. I want to stop in and see him, but yeah.
Yep.
I mean, my first anniversary trip, we went to a sheep sale.
My wife claimed it was a genetic defect on my part, but
I'll have to play that card the next time.
Now we were on an anniversary trip, and we were in Tennessee, I guess, and we happened to find out at some point that, hey, the Katahdin Association's having their expo, so we took that in. It's part of the trip. So yeah. Anyway, that's a
legitimate anniversary activity for sure.
Absolutely. About 12 years ago, or no, 13 years ago next month. So
that's probably what the time I met you at the expo.
Yep, that's when Matt and I met the first time at the expo there. Yeah. I was there with my car, and I saw this guy walking around, and it said Leola, PA on his name tag, and I'm like, hey, if I buy sheep, would you haul them back to Pennsylvania? Anyway, so Dan, you missed a one important part of your introduction. You are part of a podcast with Ryan. Tell us just a little about that.
Yeah, so Ryan Mahoney, who's a producer out here in California, and actually Dr. Rosie Bush, who is our state extension veterinarian, sheep and goat veterinarian, started a podcast during COVID, basically as an excuse to talk on the phone once a week and catch up. But we've got a little podcast called Stuff Ewe Should Know, and it's evolved over the last 4 years. It's not quite as regular as it used to be, but it's a lot of fun. It's both kind of the three of us getting together and somebody picking a topic that morning and just rambling on about it, or interviewing folks that are working in sheep, primarily in sheep related activities, and it's been a great excuse to talk to some really interesting people, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of good episodes there, folks. I enjoy listening to you guys.
We don't take ourselves too seriously, as you would probably attest. But we do have fun, and it's I find it fun just to get together and talk about sheep on a regular schedule, and there's always something new to talk about, always something new to
Yeah.
discover.
Some of our listeners would enjoy hearing things from Ryan's perspective. Like he runs pretty many animals.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
here on the East, we have a lot smaller operations, 30 to 50, 300 head operations, a lot of that type of stuff. So anyway, livestock guardian dogs. What about some of the experiments and research you've done? And maybe we can talk some about some tips on starting pups.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I kind of start, I think, from the point of my initial exposure to these dogs, and what I now know were mistakes that I made that have been confirmed by actually asking some of these questions more formally. Um, these dogs have been around for thousands of years. They were probably domesticated shortly after sheep were domesticated, and so there's been this long relationship between people, livestock, and dogs, primarily in Southern Europe, kind of Central Asia, where most of the breeds originated. And if you think about kind of how that system must have looked, the dogs that stayed with those flocks 7 or 8 thousand years ago were the dogs that got to breed, and the dogs that wandered off didn't get to reproduce. And so those decisions over thousands of years resulted in dogs like the Great Pyrenees or the Maremma, the Anatolian Shepherd. And I think collectively here in the U.S., we kind of look at all of those dogs as just big white dogs, right? If they're working dogs, they're probably some mix of those breeds. And even the ones that we say, if they're working, we say they're purebreds, they probably have a little more variable genetics than an AKC registered dog might have, for example. But one of the things that we did early on, we bought sheep. We realized something, that we needed to protect them. We were using electronet fencing and had pretty good success with that. But we were running sheep on a property that we didn't own, in an area where we knew we had all those predators I listed. And so we decided to get a dog. And we got a dog, kind of the first dog we found that was available to us. She was a 6-month-old female. And so we put her with the sheep, and things seemed to go fine until she decided that she was missing people. And one of the things we discovered in that early experience was the importance of bonding a young dog with our sheep and with our system, and not relying on a dog that had already been through the bonding process with another producer or with another management style. It turned out that she made a great pet for somebody. She really wanted to be hanging out on the front porch. There were no coyotes that ever got in that house that I'm aware of. But she was not a great guardian dog for our sheep. And I think that was kind of the first aha moment for me that maybe there's more to it than just buying a dog and turning her out. We had probably in our first 10 years of raising sheep commercially, my success rate with dogs was maybe 60%, 70%, that I'd get a dog and get it started or acquire an older dog. And a little more than half the time, they ended up being a dog I could count on. But there were those dogs in the early years that either were too rough on the sheep, or that wouldn't stay in my electric fence and became a problem, either leading sheep out of the fence or, going to the neighbors and causing problems, and certainly a liability issue for us as well. When I came into this current extension job, it was about the time that wolves were coming back into our part of the Sierra Nevada. And so there was a lot of interest amongst all livestock producers, range livestock producers, cattle, sheep, and goats, and the types of things that we could use to protect livestock from wolves and from some of the other predators. And so it seemed like a real natural opportunity to kind of to wear my extension hat instead of my rancher hat and start working with other producers and understanding how their dogs work and some of the things that were successful for them in terms of managing these dogs. We've had kind of three basic thrusts of that research. We've been using GPS collars and trail cameras with dogs and sheep in the high country where we know we will have wolves if they're not there already. And that's allowed us to kind of see what the dogs are doing 24/7. You know, if maybe your dogs are more active than mine, but you go out, you want to show somebody a dynamic example of guard dog performance. You go out there in the middle of the day and they're sound asleep under the tree.
Yeah.
People aren't convinced that they work.
Yeah.
And so these GPS collars allow us to say, here's what the dog was doing
Yeah.
for the last week. Every half hour, here's what the dog was doing. The flip side of that is too, you know, if there are folks that don't have the paradigm that these dogs will work. And one of the things that they will tell me is that, well, you know, if you're not losing sheep to predators, you don't have any predators around. And so the trail cameras have helped us establish that, yep, there are predators around. There are predators there every day and night. And if you're not losing something, the dogs are probably earning their keep. Right.
Yeah.
The other project that we've done is a survey of producers who are bonding pups, just to get a sense of what they're doing for that bonding process and how well it works. And we're trying to track those pups over time just to see how long they're staying in that particular flock. And then the third project that we did was to work with a cattle producer to demonstrate how to bond a dog with cattle, and try to help folks understand on the cattle side of the equation, you know, what this tool might look like in their operations. And that was really a response again to the wolf issue. I should back up just real quick and talk about kind of the challenge in researching predator protection. You know, our traditional approach to research is to have a control group and have a treatment group and compare the results. Nobody that I know wants to be the control group that leaves their sheep unprotected to see how many predators kill their sheep, right?
Right.
I wouldn't sign up for that. You guys probably wouldn't sign up for that either.
No.
So how do we study whether these dogs or the electric fence or anything else is effective? You know, if we can't have a traditional control in these experiments, what are we going to be able to measure? And the approach that we've taken, and I'm working with a couple of other extension colleagues on a lot of this, is that we know they work. We just want to understand why they work. We want to understand the mechanisms that are at play in how these dogs help us avoid predator losses. And so, you know, part of that question becomes, when the dogs are there on the landscape, are the predators all gone? Or are the dogs simply disrupting their predatory behavior when it comes to sheep or goats or cows? And that's part of what this research is really designed to get at.
That's really interesting. What this research is ongoing, correct?
Yeah.
All three of those.
Yep.
What are some early takeaways you've seen that I do want to I also want to hear more about how you started dogs. But what's some early takeaways that you're kind of getting from this research that maybe you didn't know before, or that might be interesting to people?
Yeah. I think, you know, a couple of takeaways on this project with the GPS collars that we're seeing. One of the concerns out here in the West, in particular on open range outfits, where there's also recreation and other uses of that landscape, is whether or not you're going to have conflicts between the dogs and recreationists. And the place where we're doing this research is heavily recreated. There's dirt bikers, mountain bikers, hikers, fishermen, hunters. I mean, all kinds of uses of this landscape. And what we're finding with the dogs is that the GPS collars tell us the dogs are rarely going more than about 300 yards from their sheep, that they're so well bonded. Even when there are predators on the landscape, those dogs are staying in close proximity to the flock. And these flocks, a band of sheep out here is somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 ewes. So it's a pretty good sized group of sheep.
Do you have sheep collared too?
We do. We do. Yeah. Yeah. And so it's been interesting to see what that kind of interaction's like. And then the way these outfits work, they'll have a camp that moves over the landscape with the sheep that the herder stays in. The dogs come in to be fed at the camp every day. The sheep bed around the camp. And so we can look at how far those dogs are going both daytime and nighttime away from the camp. And I think it's been helpful for us to be able to demonstrate that, for example, to the Forest Service, because the Forest Service is always nervous about conflicts with recreation.
Sure.
And now we've got some visual data to say, here's where the dogs stayed. And, if you go out and interview folks up there in the high country this time of year, fewer than 1% even know there's sheep out there. It's just they're pretty well camouflaged in lots of ways.
Yeah.
But I think the other interesting thing in that is that my assumption was that there were dogs that were patrollers and that there were dogs that wanted to camp with the sheep. And those roles seem to be really fluid.
Okay.
Seems like the dogs kind of work out, well, tonight I'm going to go out and patrol and you're going to stay with the sheep, or vice versa.
I was going to ask you about that along with the question of is there a couple different breeds of dogs you're running? Because in some of the research I've done or articles I've read, so forth, they always talk about, oh, this breed is really good with staying with the sheep. Then I'd also like to run some of this breed because they tend to go out and patrol a bigger area. Have you seen anything like that? Or
we haven't seen a lot of breed difference.
Okay.
And I suspect in the case of this one operation, it's because most of their dogs are mixed breeds.
Yeah.
They're, and I think from a practical standpoint, we'll come back to maybe genetic selection here in just a second, talking about pups. But I think anybody that's using these dogs successfully is picking dogs from working parents. And so the breed may not be quite as important as knowing what that particular set of genetics gives you in terms of potential. I think there are, in some of the research I've read, there is some differences in terms of breed approach to the job. There are folks that will tell you Anatolians are more aggressive, more athletic, or Akbash are more athletic. I think there's a place for all of that variation. And actually what I've observed in my own dogs and in these dogs I'm working with is that there's more individual difference than breed difference.
Yeah.
In all those dogs. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there are some new breeds, relatively new breeds in the US that I think could be interesting to look at a little more closely. Kangles out here, Transmontanos from Portugal, starting to see some of them. Caracachan dogs from kind of Central Europe. Another person you guys should definitely reach out to would be Kat Urbakite, who's a rancher in Wyoming, has done a lot of work with dogs, and she uses some Central Asian breeds with really good success in areas where they've got grizzlies and wolves both. So I think, and Kat will say this too, I think rather than a particular breed, I think it's really important for a producer to say, this is what I need from my dogs. I want to go out and find the genetics that would give my dogs this potential. Sure. So in my case, I need a dog that's going to stay with sheep, even if the electric fence is going to go down. needs to be okay with people riding bicycles by and people walking by, but needs to be able to keep the coyotes and the mountain lions away. It needs to be trustworthy at lambing time, those types of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that would, yeah, if you're like seeing more wolves move in, that's probably gonna is that gonna change what type of dog you select? Or from what I've heard, some places they just increase the number of dogs because you're dealing with a whole pack of wolves oftentimes.
Yeah, I think some of both. I
Mhm.
think some of both. I've anecdotally, and I haven't figured out how to test this, but I've talked to some producers in Idaho and Eastern Washington who think that intact male dogs have just a bit more of an edge to them and seem to be more effective where there are wolves. I've also talked to producers that have said an intact male tends to wander more if there's a wolf in heat, you know.
Mhm.
So I think there's trade-offs there to some degree. I also think just numbers are
Yeah.
important. Um, this operation that we're cooperating with on the project on the national forest last year was their first year where they knew they had wolves on their grazing permit, and so they bumped their dog numbers up
Mhm.
and had good success with that. And I
With
think part of that became a numbers game. They had enough dog power there to kind of counteract the potential threat.
Sure.
with a band of ewes like that, how many dogs are the guys usually running?
Great question. The kind of the traditional cooperative extension answer to questions like that is it depends.
It depends.
Um, but it really does depend on kind of the time of year and the situation. I think there's other ways that we accommodate being able to coexist with predators. And one of the ways this outfit did that was that they used to take pairs to the high country, so nursing ewes with lambs, and their predator losses were pretty significant.
Mhm.
Now they wean the lambs before they go to the mountains, and it's just dry ewes and cleanup bucks, and so they have very little predator loss just because they don't have the same degree of vulnerability that they would have if they were running lambs up there. This year we've got a band of sheep. We've collared dogs and sheep in two different bands in this project this year. One band is about 1,200 ewes, and there are 3 dogs with that group. And the other band's about 850 ewes, and there are 2 dogs with that group. And I would expect, unless this year there may be wolves in proximity to where these sheep are, but I would suspect that their predator losses will be, I'll be able to count predator losses on one hand with
Mhm.
both bands. And so I think, just in terms of their effectiveness up there, it's pretty remarkable. Now, when they're lambing, they're going to run a lot more dogs, and they're going to
Yep.
be behind electric fence, and they're going to be in an area that doesn't have quite the same level of risk, and that's part of their accommodation to the system as well.
Yeah. So one thing that I think a lot of folks in East here are going to struggle with is a livestock guardian dog likes to roam and patrol to a certain extent. And I think we're going to struggle pretty quick with that dog not having enough room. And that makes for dogs that are going to go through the drainage ditch that comes under through the fence.
Right.
I mean, I have even battled with some of my dogs.
Mhm.
They aren't leaving, but they will be gone. I'll pick them up on trail cameras. The neighbor picks them up on the trail camera. And I finally told the neighbors, like, look, they say, yeah, it's okay. We know you don't want the dog out there. I'm like, no, I need to know. If you're seeing my dog on your trail camera, I need to know about it.
Yep.
So I can
Yep.
take steps to correct the problem. And I had some Pyrenees in the past, and I felt like maybe there was some differences there.
Mhm.
Um, Probably some of it's just individual dogs. Do you
I
have any
think I think
tips?
there are it's hard to parse out how much of that is a
Sure.
breed difference and how much of that is an individual dog difference. And I've had dogs that were wanderers, that the 42-inch high electric fence, if a dog wants to go over it, they'll go over it. And I have actually found, most of the grazing that we do is on somebody else's place, and sometimes the landowner's really proud to show me the fence they built, and the dogs are really proud to show me the holes in the fence that the people built, because they'll find them. They'll, you turn a dog into a new pasture and they're going to go patrol the fence line
Yep.
first thing. And if there's a problem in the fence, they'll come find you. They'll be on the wrong side of the fence, but they'll come find you and say, you might need to address this issue. I think part of it's a paradigm. I think if you think the dogs will work, the first time there's a problem with it, your approach is, well, let's fix the problem. If you think the dogs are too much trouble, the first time there's a problem, that will confirm that they're too much trouble. And I think part of it's kind of the attitude of the producer going into it. All of that said, I have found with my dogs and in talking with other producers here that if I get the bonding process right, I have far few issues with the dogs wandering. I have right now, I'm down to one dog. There's some stuff going on family wise that has been different this last year. But the last couple of dogs I've had, if I have electric fence go down and sheep get out, the dogs stay with the sheep. And I think that's a function of getting them bonded, getting the pups young enough, and really focusing on that bonding process that has helped reduce that roaming tendency for us anyway. And I think every operation's different. That's the thing, right? These are not. So if you and I both know how to use a hammer, right? So I could send you a hammer and you'd know how to use it right now. I could send you my dog and it's a very different dog than you've got. And so I think when we call them tools, it's a bit of a misnomer. They're another critter in our system. They're a biological entity that makes their own decisions, has their own behaviors, has their own way of communicating. And in that sheep, human, dog system, humans are probably the least adept at understanding the other two species.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the challenge for us in using dogs as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've seen that with dogs. Well, we switched from the Great Pyrenees to the Maramas because we felt they were we had some issues with them roaming. Now I had some really good Pyrenees. I had one Pyrenees female that just, I mean, we never did anything with her. She was just with the sheep. That was as a pup, as a couple months old pup, she was with the sheep when they were lambing. And as you probably know, that can be a challenge, but she just, some just get them and others you need to use some techniques and some just don't work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that, I think one of the ahas for me is you can say the same thing about border collies, right?
Yeah.
There are border collies that, man, the first time they see a sheep, they're turned on and know what to do. And there are border collies that are great at catching frisbees and going over jumps.
Yeah.
and part of that's genetics. And when we go buy a herding dog, we want to see the parents work, right?
Yep.
And I think the same level of genetic selection ought to happen with our guardian dogs too.
Yeah.
How do you bond your dogs? I mean, I think that's for most of the producers that are new to it, that's the first question. How do you start? And
I think that's a big question, and I've learned a lot through my own trial and
it depends,
error.
right?
What's that?
It depends, right?
It depends, exactly. Exactly. No, and I think one of the challenges too for new producers is you've got sheep, you want to protect them. So your tendency is to want to go out and buy a working age dog, right? And that can work. I've had some older dogs that I've taken that have been great, and I've had some older dogs that needed to be rehomed.
Those older dogs, livestock guardian dogs, or were you having to take a dog? Yeah, what was their background? These older dogs.
The older dogs that worked had been with stock. They weren't somebody's rescue project. They weren't a dog somebody was looking to rehome because they wouldn't stay home. You know, they were dogs where people had sold their sheep and needed to sell a dog, or um, they all had that foundation to them. And I think that's one of the challenges for new producers or people new to dogs is understanding if an older dog is offered to you, is it because it was a problem for somebody else, or is it because the circumstances for that other operation have changed? I think asking those questions is really important. I won't take a rescue dog.
Can I ask one more question before you start on how you get the dog to bond?
Yeah.
So we're just assuming this producer is buying a puppy. That puppy's probably at least 8 weeks old. The first 8 weeks, how important is that?
That's where I was going to start. Great segue. I think when you're looking at a puppy, you want to at least see video of how that puppy was raised from the time it was whelped to the time you're picking it up. I want a pup that before its eyes open.
Hey folks, I hope you've been enjoying this episode on livestock guardian dogs with Dan. This episode got quite lengthy. We decided to split it into 2 episodes. So we're going to hit the pause for the time being, and we'll pick up again with Dan on our next episode. If you've got any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us. Let us know what you think. Stay tuned, and we'll hear from Dan on some of his thoughts on starting a livestock guardian dog puppy, as well as introducing them to stock. Also, just a quick word from our sponsor. Lost Creek Wholesale is your distributor of quality sheep and goat feeding and handling equipment. Ask us about our universal feeders and our Marweld handling equipment lineups, or visit our website, www.lostcreekwholesalellc.com. What if there was a way to get your herd proper nutrition with less feed waste and less stress on you and your sheep? Universal Feeders is the perfect solution, and Lost Creek Wholesale is your exclusive U.S. and Canadian distributor of these tried and proven livestock feeders. Universal Feeders feature a unique saliva lick system that controls the animal's intake, ensuring animals only eat what they need when they need it. Our feeders offer both ad-lib attachments for free choice feeding, as well as creep gate options. Our Marwell lineups offer a complete sheep and goat handling systems, including spin and trim tables, fence line feeders, hay-saving hay racks, mineral feeders, lambing jugs, and more. Give us a call or visit our website to find a dealer near you. Or if you have interest in becoming a dealer for our products, give us a shout at 717-310-3641. We'll see you folks next time.